What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today we are jumping into some more Orcs Must Die 3. This is a recap of the first 3 levels done after the crowd control change patch. So previously, when you froze enemies or crowd controlled them in a way where they stopped moving towards the rift, any orcs, ogres, other enemies that were behind them would essentially get stuck. They would no longer attempt to path and kind of just bunch up behind the crowd controlled units. This made a really big boost to a lot of strategies by allowing you to crowd control the closest enemies, and as long as you properly funneled and bottlenecked the orcs, ultimately you just get a lot of extra time for your traps to go off. Now this had some benefits and some problems. There's pros and cons. Essentially, while you got a lot of time to allow your traps to go ahead and refire, and you can control, how close and how quickly the orcs and various minions would get towards your rift, ultimately it meant that once you started building larger trap setups, if you were freezing enemies or crowd controlling them in a way that prevented them from really getting deep within your trap setups, ultimately you would have been wasting your time. You would have also had a situation where as soon as the first few enemies start to get under the effects of crowd control, if there are still enemies that haven't quite gotten into your trap setups because they're still coming out of a gate and they're bunching up at the sort of entrance to your trap funnels or kill boxes, they really just don't do anything. They're just waiting. And so people will have noticed, if you did endless or something like that before this patch, that things were just really lengthy. They took a very long time. This should make those take less time now, but you're going to be dealing with a situation where your traps will be going off more often. Probably may make some combos easier, and this also makes it feel more in line with the older Orcs Must Die games, which I think a lot of veterans will probably enjoy. But with that comes, the fact that it might be a little bit more difficult for certain stages, since you can't rely as hard on crowd controlled as you used to be able to. But let's just get into what's actually going on in the levels, and we'll see what's happening from here. So here we are using a immediate funnel at the first gate. This is North Wing, so this is the only gate, and that means that we can start funneling enemies immediately without really having to worry about anything. But we're also opting for the swinging mace as our first real damage trap. Now this will give us a bit of area to deal damage as soon as enemies start to funnel, as well as it being placed over a tar trap with the increased slow duration after they step off of the trap. So that gives you a lot of time to make sure that enemies are going to be hit by that trap in particular. Now this isn't the powerhouse that it was in Orcs 2, or no, sorry, not Orcs 2, but in Orcs Unchained, where it literally would wipe a lot of the smaller orcs out immediately. But you'll notice here that there's a bit of physics added to the swinging mace. You're going to have light, medium, and even heavy orcs sort of mildly displaced by them being hit by that trap, even when they're under the effects of crowd control. And that is something that you need to be aware of, just because even if they happen to be frozen or stunned or moving backwards, when they get hit, depending on the direction that it's swinging, they could actually fly outside of the trap funnel. It normally won't lift them enough to knock them over your barricades, which is great, because if it did, then it would be a little bit tricky to use. Or more tricky than it already is. But if the enemies get heavily bunched up, you may see them spread out. If the entire length of the swinging mace doesn't have sort of capping barricades, you can even see that light orc kind of got knocked behind me a bit there. So you'll need to be aware, if you do use the swinging mace, of its propensity to just knock people outside of its initial range. You won't be able to just guarantee that you can crowd control somebody under the mace and it just keeps beating them over the head until they drop. I don't know why I'm doing a hand motion of like slapping an orc right now, but I was. But regardless, it's still pretty nice. If you have it set up to burn, then instead of just swinging slightly faster, I think it's really not a ton faster. You may get like a second off of the amount of swinging time if you choose the faster swinging speed versus you know, just literally setting things on fire if you choose to have the flaming swinging mace. But I like the option. You know, I will plan on experimenting with some of the traps as far as the upgrades, just to see how much utility you can get out of different ones. But the swinging mace definitely is a good go-to here on a lot of stages. Just the coverage that you get with that trap for the cost is really nice. Its placement is a bit restrictive, but because it swings through all three areas and it's relatively easy to sync up, and just in general it's good. It's a good trap to have. Now these enemies sort of got pushed out, and you can see by the amount of coin that I have here that it's important that I actually have started trapping around the swinging mace a while ago, a bit more, and I was more focused with just trying to get those wall traps up than getting some supporting ceiling traps up. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to make sure that you have some sort of trap synergies going. Having this sort of ceiling row that I have set up here, where you have the initial trap dealing the damage in the funnel, then you have a side trap that can trigger to help crowd control enemies, in this case with the ice dart spitter, or the dart spitter with ice element added as its unique upgrade, or special upgrade. Sorry, uniques are actually, wait, no, it's unique. I'm confusing the slot that's given to the trinkets. But yeah, like having an extra trap to the side of your swinging mace that supports it by helping to freeze the enemies really doubles, it does double duty, as it prevents you from having to dump your mana to guarantee that enemies aren't moving too fast. And then for some additional damage, you can have the ballistas placed. Now, that was the first level, and it really didn't show off that much of a difference. But if you paid attention, you could see that when some of the enemies were getting slowed or frozen, that they sort of just pushed through anyway, or they would try to path through the crowd-controlled enemies. I'm going to skip ahead to the second level directly from here, and we'll go in from there. So this will be a lengthier video than the last three that I put out, but it's going to have 3 levels in it. So here we're going to have some very different stuff happening. This is not going to be using the same traps that I did the first time I did the Great Room, but we're going to be looking at the way that the first wave is handled specifically, because it's very different now that the crowd control pathing and everything is a little bit different after the patch. But also I'm going in with different traps, and this will show that even with those changes to crowd control, there's still some very powerful and you know, sort of self-contained trap setups that you can put out. And it's probably going to highlight, for most people that haven't used it yet, the strengths of the Window of Butterflies. It's a really amazing trap, and this will probably show it off if you haven't already dove into it yourself. So the initial barricade setup is going to be exactly the same as it was before. We're going to barricade outside of this room and put a viscous tar out to go ahead and slow the orcs as they're passing through. Again, this will have the slow duration after they step off of the trap, so we're still going to have some slow for about the first tile after they step off of it, and that should help with the crowd control aspects a bit. But you can see I don't have a ton of cash left, with only 50 coins, and I haven't placed any other traps. I'm also using the stone staff for crowd control here. It's similar to using the ice amulet, but doesn't deal damage, and it uses up slightly less mana in my experience. but it fires in a cone rather than damage area around the player. This was also mainly because I needed to unlock its unique. So this is very suboptimal, but you can see the orcs pathing very well through enemies that are crowd controlled. Ogres obviously still don't give a fuck, so they will just burst through whatever you have set up, and if it's smaller orcs or minions of any sort, they will just knock them out of the way. No Yi to defeat the day, however, so we're just going to go about building out this. And I accidentally placed a barricade that only leaves a half unit space there. It's a good thing we only had one ogre coming out this wave. I realized that as soon as this ogre shows up and it starts attacking one of the outside barricades here in a few seconds. But after I eventually fixed that, and we're pretty much good to go. Now, the best thing to do probably would not have been to lengthen this setup first. It would have been to, instead of placing that barricade that actually messed up the setup, to probably have just tossed a grinder out in front of that viscous, no, not viscous tar. It behaves like viscous tar and has a habit of calling it that because of Unchained. But in front of that tar trap, yeah, we could have just placed a grinder. I'm not sure why that cone didn't actually hit the ogre. Like, I'll probably have to play through that and try it a couple different ways, but either it doesn't fire off well in the air or the barricade blocked it. Either way, now we start actually trapping things up correctly. We got a little bit of crowd control going. We did not bring a ceiling damage trap for the main line that the orcs will be walking through. We're starting to control them while they're in this area a bit, and it's really hard to see, but there are orcs trying to path through some of them after they get stoned. They don't pass through them very quickly, and because we still have tar there, it's not that bad. But there is some circumstances here where you'll see them try to like walk between, or where smaller orcs will try to walk between the larger ones after they get crowd control. It's easier to see with the smaller ones when they actually get to the front of the line. But this setup particularly is strong because of the way that grinders work with the window of butterflies. Normally grinders only damage enemies that pass in front of them, and they'll just take a damage off until they run out of juice, and then they'll have to cool down. When they hit the butterflies, the orcs will turn around and start pathing backwards. So this basically doubles the amount of time that the grinder has to spend on targets if they path all the way back through it, or at the very least just gives the grinder more time to do its damage. And because they turn around and have to turn around to walk forward again, it's just really good at allowing you to deal damage with continuous traps like this. It's probably going to make it really strong just as a crowd control choice, but in addition to that, traps that have a sort of continuous activation like the grinder, or that activate on a timer like the swinging mace, are probably going to be super strong with this, period. Like, it's just a really good trap for a number of different reasons, and probably, in my opinion, one of the best crowd control traps that has ever been made for Orcs Must Die. Like, it's extremely unique due to it being a half-space wall trap as well. And you can see that because you're able to use it at a relatively high elevation and place it above wall traps that normally deal damage, it's just a really good trap. And it fits easily into a lot of loadouts that make use of walls because of it. Like, Confusion is a pretty good ability on its own, but specifically with the fact that you can lower the cost of this trap. I don't have it maxed out here. I think I only have one upgrade in it at most, if it costs $450, and there's like 3 more that you can get to drop the cost even more. In addition to that, if you get the unique upgrade, which I hadn't had unlocked for this yet, you could even have it dealing damage when it actually hits enemies. So there's a lot of versatility to that trap. You can increase the duration of the confuse as well if you're really looking for that maximized crowd control and don't want the arcane damage. But another source of arcane damage, because it combos well with dealing multiple elements, and we would likely have something doing fire and ice damage as well. It's good. It's such a versatile trap that I think you guys should definitely find a way to throw it in a lot of loadouts. Give it a shot, play around with it. Either way, we're going to be moving on to the third level now. So for the last level in this video, we're going into the side entrance, the third map in Riftlord, and this one's going to throw a lot of wrenches at you if you were to use a trap setup that only focused on a single element or didn't properly feature a good mix. You're going to run into issues because if you're using fire, there are fire fiends on this level. If you're using arcane, there's going to be some mages. There's going to be runners too, so traps that don't have any sort of continuous damage action are going to be a bit of an issue if you try to put those out. Stacking crowd control, as always, is a very good choice. And here we have Viscous Tar and the lovely Window of Butterflies, which I'm working to finish off, at least at this point, the mastery or proficiency to make sure that we can access the unique upgrades and get that damage bonus on it. We decrease the cost a little bit more by spending some skulls on it, and yeah, we're pretty much ready to go in now. So we're setting up the same place that we did before, and that's going to be in front of the rift, not too far away from where enemies are able to run into it, but it's at the first place where the two lanes join. So we're trying to get our damage set up to really take out as many of the threats that come in as possible. And what we're going to sort of do is set up damage that works very well in the first round and diversify it as the waves continue, so that if we had left things sort of as they're set up in the beginning, it would actually be very bad. Once you get the mages and things out here, you're really going to want to be dealing damage with something other than your initial arcane brimstones, mainly because mages just won't take much damage from them and they'll soak up a lot of the charges. They're also going to try to kill you with their homing projectiles, so
always ready.
Just trying to stay alive when you start to get assaulted by a large group of ranged enemies with the mages and the dynamite archers, and then like them being sort of vanguarded by ogres and gnolls, and just everything that's trying to literally wipe you out is pretty crazy. But that's going to be, you know, pretty much par for the course. We sort of, you know, forsook combos here and just went in on clearing out some of the orcs early, just to see if, you know, any changes here might affect the par a bit. Didn't really change things that much. The orcs are weak against the elemental traps, so Arcane specifically just kind of eradicates them. And you can crowd control them for a little bit of added damage. It's a good idea to make sure that you get the orcs before you get charged, because orcs will stun you with their charge before actually dealing any damage, and that extra weight before they hit you and the stun goes away actually makes it really hard to crowd control enemies, mainly because they just get to run through. And if you can at least get used to stopping ogres before they get close to you, you'll be able to forsake like needing the freedom trinket or anything like that. It's better to just avoid the stun altogether than need something to protect you against it. And that was me dipping back into the rift just to sort of regain that health. And while we're leaving the arcane brimstone out, we added a slow, threw up one or two of the grinders, and I was checking space to make sure that we would be able to put up a window of butterflies. Now, in those areas where the torches are, you can only place a wall trap, and these sort of sunken recesses between them, you have the spacing for a wall trap, and a window of butterflies. So it's really good to go ahead and just place those there. They work out really well. You'll have to be on the lookout for things that might run through. Now, you'll notice that that was one of the things that you probably would not have seen before, where if you had the larger enemies crowd controlled, you would kind of be okay as far as not having to worry about the smaller ones kind of run through. Oh man, and these guys are really pelting me with those explosive arrows. The maneuvering here was really, really clutch. Because if I didn't get close enough to that rift, those explosions definitely would have killed me. And the use of the stone staff is also, like, this is pretty bad here. Like, I should have actually been focused more on dealing a lot more damage to these guys with heavier weapons sooner, and taking out those archers in a lot better fashion. If I'd have placed those butterflies a bit sooner, that would have been a lot easier. And I had the coin to place the butterflies without placing the first grinder initially, and that probably would have just made that entire exchange a lot easier. The butterflies seem to work on just about everything. They'll affect the gnolls, they'll affect the ogres, like all of the things that are normally heavy and give you a bit of trouble. And that really gives you a lot of breathing room. Not just because it controls them, but because it sort of pushes them away from you at the same time by allowing them to path backwards. Super nice. And then here we have the Fire Fiend mages. Now, they're strong against arcane damage, so you're not going to be able to count on that. It's best to just go ham with the physical, and you should be fine otherwise. Dipping behind the wall will allow their projectiles to actually disappear. Luckily, the projectile tracking in this game is a lot better than it was in Arcane, so Unchained. Unchained is the word I was looking for. But if it hits the wall, it actually disappears. It doesn't seem to just, you know, go through the wall and slap you in the face like it did before. So that's nice. It does give you a bit of security, you know, allowing you to sort of peek into walls. But you have to be careful, because if you try to do that with barricades, they will damage your barricades. And just like they do a good chunk of damage to you, they will do a good chunk of damage to your barricades. At this point, I'm pretty safe. We have, what, 1 or 2 dart spitters up? Yeah, and we're pretty much just going for extra gravy at this point. Not much, if anything, is going to start getting through by the time you get to wave 4. If your trap setup has been doing its job, then ultimately it's just going to peak right about here, and you can start to just add extra traps for gravy or combos or whatever you want to do to make things work a little bit easier for you. Just make sure that you look out for the explosive archers, and that you're also working to not allow yourself to get killed or your barricades destroyed, and you'll be fine.
They're attacking a barricade.
I am very low on
Barricade is
health.
under attack.
They don't seem more intimidating. Much easier than I anticipated. Placing
More
traps
enemies on
is
the way.
always fun. The big ones do die hard.
They're attacking a barricade.
What? Fantastic. 5 times bigger and dies 5 times harder. Excuse me, you're the boss of what now? He's not the boss anymore. There's not enough coin for that.
And so ultimately, this starts to wind down right here. You know, things that we can pull from this is basically that crowd control still sort of does its job. It's not at a sort of god tier level like it was before, where a little bit of crowd control literally could stop the entire army, which in my opinion was kind of overpowered. I know a lot of people had focused on that as technique to win some of the levels without really building as focused a trap setup, or without necessarily pathing enemies as well as they could have. And you know, those are probably going to be the setups that give you the most issues now. But to be fair, at least here, this is Rift Lord, and you really got to know your stuff, or at least you're supposed to by the time you get here. That's why it's unlocked until you get through a significant portion of the story. That said, you know, hone your chops, level up your traps, make sure you're prepared when you go in here, and I really don't see anybody having too much trouble. Either way, we'll get into the next map soon. Hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Let me know what you think about this style of video below. Like, do you guys want to see more multiple levels condensed into a single space or a single video, or would you like them, you know, individually so that you can see the specific level you're looking for and not have to jump around in times and things like that? Either way, if you enjoyed this, feel free to like the video. I sincerely appreciate you guys for watching it. And if you want to see more things that I'll be doing in the future, feel free to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, follow me, and you know, you'll see everything that I plan on doing. Some of it will be orcs, some of it will be other things that I enjoy or am passionate about, and as always, I enjoy sharing it with you. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves. That's the most important thing, and have a good one, folks. Peace.